Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
When you are a journalist and you get woken by a ringing phone, the news is never good. Rarely, though, is it this grim. It's not my phone that rings, because obviously there's no need for me to rush to work with Mr. Ferrari covering breaking developments. It's my wife's phone that rings. And just to give you an indication of how bad the news is likely to be in the course of today, her phone rings when Australian and American media are interested in events in London. So 3 hours and 5 minutes ago, I thought there'd been another terrorist attack. There hasn't, but it looks like the impact of this fire in North Kensington could be greater than recent tragedies. 50 people taken to hospital, and as firefighters pick their way up the stairs of this charred and broken building, you don't need me to tell you what they will be encountering as they move upwards. You also don't need me to tell you how desperately we search at times like this, not just for explanations, but also sometimes for something or someone to blame. And it's an impulse that you have to resist. But equally, you can't ignore evidence that floats into your orbit. And quite rightly, an awful lot of people have been sharing an awful lot of words written on a blog entitled The Grenfell Action Group. I don't know quite how to play this story this morning, because it is still developing and almost guaranteed to get grimmer before time goes on. So I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I think I've found the chap who writes this blog, and I think the last address I could find for him is in the Tower blog. I'm not going to say his name or anything like that. It's not out there yet. And the blog has been updated this morning, so it may well be that the people responsible for it are okay, but I haven't been able to identify a contact number for them. I can't remember reading something in the still unfolding situation that chilled me quite as much as this morning. But I stress again that this is just... well, it's a heavily involved individual, heavily involved in the history of this building, and heavily motivated, but not necessarily. I'm just putting it out there that we don't know for sure that this analysis, that this explanation is infallible. But we do know that it was published in November of 2016. November of 2016, and we do know that the conclusion on this blog post written in November of 2016 is thus: the Grenfell Action Group predict that it won't be long before the words of this blog come back to haunt the KCTMO management, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that those in authority know how long and how appallingly our landlord has ignored their responsibility to ensure the health and safety of their tenants and leaseholders. They can't say that they haven't been warned. I do not know for sure that this account is accurate, but it seems to me that if somebody was writing in November 2016 that something identical to what is currently unfolding in West London was likely to happen, we have a public duty to tell you. And we'll tell you everything we can in the course of this morning. Other things I've managed to find are the architects responsible for the work, a company called Studio E, and I'll tell you what they said on their release with regard to the contract that they'd secured to do this. And then if you know anything about this business, this world, you perhaps can chip in with your insights. The scope of the works was described as overcladding with ACM cassette rain screen, window replacement, curtain walling, louvres and feature metal work. The development company, Ryden, which secured the £10 million refurbishment contract in May 2014, have adjusted slightly their webpage describing the secure of the work and what it would do. They talked about remodelling to incorporate 7 new homes, as well as a nursery being relocated from another part of the building. And when the work actually was finished, I think the sum at 10 million sum had come down to 8.8 million. And then, somewhat oddly, the third line of this, I just want to make sure I get it absolutely right. The third line of it, yes, the Studio E Architect website has come down since I found it earlier this morning. Maybe it has been It's Harley Facades who talked about overcladding with ACM cassettes. So they supply the cladding. The architects are called Studio E. Their website has disappeared since I got to work this morning, and the development company is called Ryden. You now know as much as anybody else does, okay? I am so conscious of the risks of speculating unduly, so we won't. We'll just talk about what we know through the course of the morning, and what we know is the fire brigade have reported fatalities. The situation continues to unfold as those brave men and women make their way up those stairs. You'll allow me just to suggest for a moment we imagine what their working day is going to be like. And they will, in the coming months, be asking for your help in various scenarios, your support in various situations. Try to remember days like today next time we're talking about firefighters and the fire brigade. And as further details emerge, 50 taken to hospital, but many still unaccounted for, we will bring you all the details as they come to us. There have been other fires that some people suggested should have provided fair warning of what would happen in the event of things not being quickly taken under control. But the one other element I'm going to bring to you now, this is from the Tower Regeneration newsletter published by Kensington and Chelsea TMO, that's the landlord, as it were, Tenants Management Organisation, a housing association, and Ryden, the developers. This, as far as I can tell, and it tallies with something written in the Grenfell Action Group blog, is the last available emergency fire advice given to tenants. It speaks of a long-standing stay-put policy, and I need you to talk to me about this if you're in the fire brigade, because it must make sense to you on some level. To civilians like me, it doesn't really make any sense at all. This is the fire advice given to the residents of the block that still burns in July of 2014. Our long-standing stay-put policy stays in force until you are told otherwise. This means that, and this is the bit that the rest of us will struggle with, so if you're in the fire service and you're not on duty at the moment, maybe you could help us out. This means that unless there is a fire in your flat or in the hallway outside your flat, you should stay inside your flat. This is because Grenfell was designed according to rigorous fire safety standards. Also, the new front doors for each flat can withstand a fire for up to 30 minutes, which gives plenty of time for the fire brigade to arrive. They were there within 6 minutes. Although, again, I have to remind you of the number of firefighters who've told me over the course of the years that I've been doing this job and taking a particular interest in their work, that those response times were being, in some circumstances, unnecessarily extended by cuts to the number of appliances and the number of stations serving London. 27 fire engines down, I think, on where we were 2 mayors ago. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. You may be nearby. You may have people in the building. You may be able to tell us a little bit about what the community is doing to respond. This is international news. It's not London-centric or in any way focusing on one town more than we would on any other. If you have seen even, I know this part of London so well. I've lived there and worked there for over half of my time in this town. The LBC studios were within walking distance. They were yards, hundreds, 200-300 yards away from this block. I remember when it was being refurbished. I remember being amazed by, and at the time very impressed by, the fact that they were doing it without moving anybody out. So you'd have sort of, up one side of the building there'd be scaffolding, and up the other side people would still have their washing hanging out. And I don't know, and now is not the time to wonder whether or not that speaks perhaps of economies that shouldn't have been made, but we do know that this should not have happened. If you read the fire advice given to the actual residents 3 years ago, you learn that the building was designed according to rigorous fire safety standards, which enabled the authority to tell the residents to stay in their flats in the event of a fire. I heard one resident being interviewed this morning who said that's what they had been told to do. That's what the notices say. But he said, no way was I. As soon as I realised what was going on, I grabbed my girlfriend and daughter and ran for the stairs. Some people not hearing any alarms. You wouldn't hear alarms if the building had been properly compartmentalised. The idea is it was built in such a way that any fire would be contained to a small corner of the building where it started. This has categorically not happened. You need to help me a bit today. If I do somehow fail to resist the temptation to speculate. I want you to rein me in, because this is the sort of moment that a radio station like LBC is the beating heart of a community like the one in Kensington, whence we used to broadcast. So if we move into the realms of scapegoating or irresponsible blaming or speculation, then you edit, you produce, you present the programme just as much as we do, okay? So you hold my hand on that one, and in return I will do my best to bring you all of the relevant information that we need to work out what has happened, and I think it's fair to say why, how, and what. The number you need in the meantime is 0345 6060 973. I'd like to begin, with your permission, with people who can answer this question. Just explain a stay-put policy to us. To those of us who've I mean, I haven't lived in a block of flats for nearly 20 years. The last block of flats I lived in, on the 5th floor with a lift, I'd never heard of a stay-put policy. Would you mind just taking a moment first, and then we'll work out what we're going to do next? But first up, what's a stay-put policy, and why is it a good idea usually, and what might, and this isn't speculation because we're going to be speaking to people who know what they're talking about, what might have gone wrong? How could a building that had a stay-put policy have gone up like a tinderbox? We begin this morning with the question of what a stay-put policy, what the wisdom behind a stay-put policy is, and what could have gone so catastrophically wrong in this case. First, though, LBC's Rachel Venables is at Grenfell Tower in West London, where firefighters continue to battle the blaze, but also, of course, to make their way up into the building. Rachel, what's the latest?
Well, it's incredible to think, really, when I imagine what the fire looked like just a couple of hours ago, to imagine that fire crews have actually managed to make their way as high as the 19th floor, we understand it, in their investigation. Because when I arrived here at 3:30 this morning, it was completely alight. You know, all you could see for miles around was the bright red, orange flames flickering up, the huge plumes of black smoke as well. But in the last few hours, it has calmed down, and all really that is left is just the jagged outline of what used to be home to 120 people and families. You know, it's sticking up into the air. I can sort of see the molten, twisted beams that are left. It's issuing smoke, but that's just a light sort of white colour now, so anyone driving past possibly wouldn't notice anything out of the ordinary on what is a very sort of sunny, blue-skied day. But on the ground, absolute panic and fear from people who are looking for loved ones. I just spoke to a gentleman called Happy. Now, he doesn't live in this block. He lives just a few houses away. He's been at some of the crisis centres down here on the ground, and he met with a woman who's lost her 12-year-old daughter, and he's trying to find her. This is what he told me.
I initially went to a community centre to offer help, sat with some people that were very distressed, and when I got this woman to eventually talk, she told me that her 12-year-old is missing, that she left the 21st floor with her and hasn't seen her since. So I've just been going from centre to centre to try and find her, which I've not managed at the moment.
How is her mum? It sounds like a stupid, awful question. How is she doing?
Well, not good. I mean, my youngest is 13. I don't even want to empathise. It's too much. It's very hard not to cry now, to be honest with you. Let's hope she's gone to a hospital. But if anybody that's listening to this knows of Lula, her mum is at the Bramley Community Centre right now on Bramley Road.
And what did her mum say had happened? She was rushing out and lost her in the panic?
Yeah, she left the 20. They live on the 21st floor. I don't know how many floors it is, but I'm assuming that must be the top. It can't be many more than that. Again, having been into a house by myself in the past, you can't see anything. So her daughter was left with her, and that's the last time she saw her. I know, right. That's the last time she saw her. So I'm just, I'm kind of taking that as my mission to try and find Lula right now.
You could hear him tearing up at the end there. It was really difficult. And of course, he's never met this woman before. He's never met the little girl before, but he's made it his mission to try and reunite the two. I'm also standing here outside St Clement's Church, which is another amazing scene of sort of human spirit and coming together, as dozens of people have been turning up with shopping trolleys, with bags full of spare clothes, water, food and drink, tea bags, all for the volunteers and, of course, for the hundreds of people who are now homeless.
Rachel Venables, more from you, no doubt, throughout the day on LBC as we continue to report and learn of what has transpired in West London. More than 50 taken to 5 hospitals, fire brigade confirming that there have been fatalities. If you follow me on Twitter, I've just retweeted a photograph of some of the firefighters who've clearly been into the building and come out again. I know this, but it's by Latimer Road Tube. Anyone who's ever been to the Notting Hill Carnival here in London will be familiar with this part of town, and they're sitting there in their breathing equipment. Somebody clearly living in a flat just over the railway line has taken a photograph of the resting firefighters with the very simple caption, "Heroes," and there's some grim-looking faces there. These are the men and women who would have been into the building already. As we just heard, they've reached the 19th floor. There are 5 floors still remaining. I am in your hands, as always, on a day like today. It seems to me that there are questions that we can already start to ask, but probably not fingers that we should already be starting to point, however tempting that might be. Jim's in Islington. Jim, what can you tell us?
Good morning, James. Yeah, I've just recently retired from the fire service after over 30 years. I had the pleasure of meeting you on a few occasions during the industrial action a few years ago. What you got? We need to clarify here is that there's actually since Lakenhall House, there's fire survival guidance calls where people ring up our control and they're assigned an officer and they talk to them, and then that's relayed to the fire ground, and then there's a systematic evacuation of the building. So people like Piers Morgan this morning on GMTV really got the wrong end of the stick and was, showing people still in the building. They'll be in contact with the fire brigade, and there's a well-rehearsed procedure. Just
for people who don't know, this was the tower block fire in 2009, I think, in Camberwell, where at least 20 people were injured and 6 people were killed. And I have seen suggestions. I haven't been watching the telly this morning, Jim, and I can't really comment on that, but you're clearly in your area of expertise. There have been suggestions that lessons should have been learnt from Lakenhall House that perhaps weren't learnt. You're telling us that some lessons were clearly learnt.
Well, lessons. There are well-rehearsed procedures since Lakenhall House in place by the London Fire Brigade. This is an unprecedented tower block fire, normally seen in like Far East and places like Dubai and what have you. So there's a well-rehearsed procedure. The fire brigade are doing a systematic. Let's speak up for the fire brigade. I've been in it for 30 years. They've got a well-dedicated team at the top, and it was all filtered down. And there'll be a systematic, well-rehearsed procedure that people will be spoken to, and they'll be given advice, and then that will be relayed to the fire ground, and then the people on the fire ground will make the decisions and then make a phased evacuation of the building and get as many people out as possible.
What's got you puzzled at the moment, Jim?
Nothing's got me puzzled. Just that I didn't like the reporting from certain parts of the media this morning that I was watching, having just recently retired, and once a fireman, always a fireman.
I understand that, but let me remind you what the advice to the residents is. Our long-standing stay-put policy stays in force until you are told otherwise. This means that unless there is a fire in your flat or in the hallway outside your flat, you should stay inside your flat. This is because Grenfell was designed according to rigorous fire safety standards. Also, the new front doors for each flat can withstand a fire for up to 30 minutes, which gives plenty of time for the fire brigade to arrive. The reason I use the word puzzled, and you don't have to answer this because it's clearly not what you rang in for, but I'm puzzled by how, with advice to residents that they'll be all right inside their house inside their home for 30 minutes, and that they should stay put, and yet it appears that the building has gone up like paper.
I think the questions need to be asked about the cladding, possibly on the outside. But again, that will come out in the fullness of time. But if you think about it, fire engines are within 6 minutes, which is the correct Home Office guidelines. Fire engines have got sirens, so they not only to warn people that get out of the way, but also to just calm residents that they are present outside. The people will be ringing up 999 from their flats. They have lovely, compassionate control officers talking them through.
I sense you're concerned that the fire brigade have perhaps been taking an undeserved criticism already this morning. And as you've mentioned, we've encountered each other in the past. I'll always do my bit to fight the firefighters' corner, but it's not my top priority at the moment. You understand that, don't you, Jim?
But then again, the bigger picture is as well, like Mr. Sadiq Khan is now the Mayor of London. Previous to that, 27 fire engines were removed, fire stations were closed down quite near to where this incident has taken place. So there's a bigger picture to look at. And again, it's only when things like this happen, or a terrorist attack in London, that the emergency services are brought to the forefront. But all the time they're chipping away at all the stuff in the meantime.
Again, causation and correlation aren't necessarily the same thing. There have been cuts to public services, to emergency services, to fire stations, to fire appliances, and yet, as you said yourself, they were there mob-handed within 6 minutes. So we'll just hold back on that for the time being. That's not to say that we won't be asking difficult questions. It just, obviously, first thoughts at the moment with people who are hurt. Second thoughts with people who can't find their family, can't find their loved ones. Third thoughts for me always with the men and women that go into these buildings that the rest of us are fleeing from. And then maybe room for thoughts about other things, like legislation that was passed last year in the House of Commons to reject calls for it to be made illegal for landlords to have uninhabitable residences. Actually voted down in the House of Commons. A bill which won't have been relevant to this particular case, but it does speak of a bigger picture, a bill that was sought to criminalise landlords taking money in return for legally uninhabitable accommodation. Got voted down in the House of Commons. Close, but it got voted down. It's 29 minutes after 10. The number you need is 03456060973. Do you live in a flat where they have a stay put policy? I don't understand the stay put policy. Jim, understandably concerned that some of the media speculation was perhaps unfairly maligning his former profession. We'll keep an eye on that possibility. But I want to look at this. This is the last available information given to the residents of Grenfell Tower. It dates back to 2014. It corroborates with comments made in this blog, this horribly prescient and prophetic blog published by the Grenfell Action Group. They cross over these two things when they talk about the advice. Residents were informed by a temporary notice stuck in the lift and one announcement in a recent Regeneration newsletter that they should remain in their flats in the event of fire. Why? Obviously, it was sound advice, considered to be sound advice. Events would suggest fairly comprehensively that it wasn't sound advice, and that is where we'll focus our attention for the time being. That is secondary, of course, to the unfolding scenarios and the no doubt severe casualty count that we'll become aware of in the course of our time together this morning. Details continue to emerge, but very little certainty. We do know that 50 people have been taken to 5 different hospitals. We do know that the first fire engine on the scene was there in less than 6 minutes. We know that there are 120 flats in Grenfell Tower where firefighters have now reached the 19th of 24 floors. More on that as and when it emerges. We also know, and this is where things become a little bit sticky, we also know that a blog has been written for some years which did predict a catastrophe of precisely this nature, but it doesn't necessarily follow that is a prediction in the purest sense of the word. It could be a coincidence, but I would refer you to read it yourself, the Grenfell Action Group. I've now been sent a letter which apparently shows an attempt by the local council to shut down the blog, although it did make specific reference to allegations of criminality by named individuals, so that won't be pertinent to what we are discussing today. Just another line from this Grenfell Action Group community blog. It is our conviction that a serious fire in a tower block or similar high-density residential property is the most likely reason that those who wield power at the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation, the KCTMO, will be found out and brought to justice. And incredibly powerful words that I've got to be honest with you. I think ordinarily, if these had come across my desk on a normal day, I probably would have filed them under, interesting, but tread carefully, seems a bit over the top. Got to be honest with you about these things. I get sent a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff crosses our desks here at LBC, and that probably would have been filed under the, well, we'll look into this, but it seems a little bit excitable. And it still may be. But it's not a position I'd be prepared to defend in the current climate. Matt's in South London. Matt, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello there, James.
Hello.
I've called it on my serving firefighter in London, and I've just like to call up to discuss about the stay put policy.
Yes.
That a lot of councils have got in their blocks, but also the brigade advise it as well. In a normal situation, so normal fire situation, which this clearly wasn't, a stay put policy, most of these blocks are concrete construction. If there is a fire within a flat, that fire will be very unlikely to spread outside of that flat. So, I mean, the brigade will advise to stay put unless you're being directly affected by smoke or fire. And that will be...
Because concrete doesn't burn, so eventually wherever the fire started is going to burn itself out, and everybody who's not in the immediate locus is going to be safe.
Exactly, and it will give firefighters a chance to get up to the affected flat and tackle the fire before it spreads. Obviously, you've got different contributing factors to that. So you've got, in the summer months, windows are open. So flames can spread out of the window, catch people's curtains upstairs, things like that. So there's different contributing factors. But normally, a stay-put policy would be the best policy. It also, if people are clearing out their flats, it will also hinder emergency crews getting into the block if there's one central staircase. So all those sort of things come into play with it.
Yes.
Obviously,
So you lead me towards wondering, because you've alluded to this already, whether or not the policy is designed. The policy is contingent upon the fire spreading inside the building, and because it won't, you can stay put. But if it can spread up the outside of the building, then it's an entirely different ballgame, and that's why people keep talking about the cladding that was installed during the recent refurbishment.
Exactly, and I'm not going to speculate on the information why it's...
But I can't say that. When people say I'm not going to speculate, and then I say, but go on, speculate. But looking at the pictures, not speculating, but with your firefighting expertise, that looks like a fire that has spread up the outside of the building.
Yeah, most definitely, yeah. And I've heard people calling for sprinklers in residential blocks. This incident wouldn't... it would have perhaps dampened it down a little bit inside, but spreading outside externally, sprinklers wouldn't have helped in that, in my opinion.
What is... some people listening to this, particularly if they live in more salubrious or more luxurious residential developments, they'd be astonished to hear that a building like that doesn't have sprinklers in it. Is the decision taken on a purely financial basis?
I'm not sure of that decision.
Fair enough.
That's the council's decisions and the housing authorities.
Well, we'll ask them if they start answering their phones.
It will be very difficult. There's a lot of tower blocks in London, as you know. To retrofit sprinkler systems would take a lot of time. At the moment, these concrete blocks, and the thing is also, this was, I believe, a 70s built block.
Okay, yes.
So, you've got to think now the technology that people have got in their flats, fire loading, loads of chargers, laptops, they wouldn't have been around in the 70s.
True.
So we've also got to look at things like that, the fire loading within flats. It's a difficult one. A stay-put policy in a normal situation would be the best course of action.
And yet it flies. I get it now. I get it a lot better. The simple physical fact of concrete not being flammable explains it, and yet it's difficult. I don't know if you heard one eyewitness this morning just saying, I knew we were supposed to stay put, but there's no way I was going to, and once I could smell smoke, I'm going to run out of there. And I think most of us would, wouldn't we?
Well, do you know what? They've made the right decision, obviously, in that respect. I will just quickly add, our control operators will be taking lots of calls to this. I believe the firefighter spoke about our fire survival guidance.
Yes.
Now, you've got to remember as well, our control operators can't see the actual incident. So, until there's some sort of confirmation, but they're giving the policy that they're instructed to give, and that's the only policy they can adhere to at that time. It's very difficult to make a judgment because they could be sending someone potentially into danger if they tell them to get out. You see what I mean? So,
of course.
It's a very grey area, but in a normal situation, a stay-put policy would probably be the best. This is no normal situation.
And that is something, an observation enforced by the appearance of the building, a very strong suggestion that it's gone up the side. Presumably, Matt, before you go, structural engineers will be on the site now, because it's such a vicious fire that they'll be worried about the structural integrity of the building.
Of course. But we've got to search the building, we've got to account all the lives. London Fire Brigade, their sole purpose is to rescue life.
Yes.
And save savable life. So, you know, any loss is a tragedy, and we'll all be feeling it today. And on that respect, my condolences go out to all the families involved.
And obviously, you know, had shift patterns and geography being a bit different, you could be one of the men and women currently making their way up the stairs in that building. So, I mean, our eternal and permanent gratitude goes out to you and your colleagues. It's 10:42. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The consensus would appear to be that something has happened that shouldn't have happened. Human error, dumb luck. Never forget the power of dumb luck, the fickle finger of fate. We spend so much energy as human beings trying to pretend that dumb luck doesn't exist, that we can actually insulate ourselves against tragedy and horror by doing this, whether it's anything from internment to never leaving the children alone. We're always trying to convince ourselves that we can protect ourselves from tragedy, protect ourselves from horrors. And sometimes you just can't, but you can't conclude that dumb luck has played a part until you've asked every question going, and that process will begin in earnest in the coming days. For now, first thoughts, as they should be, with the families most directly affected. I can't imagine, if you are in that category, that you'd want to talk to me on the radio, but if you do, if we can offer any help, support at all, then you know what to do. 0345 606 0973. Parts of the 24-storey building are still on fire. Firefighters have got at least as high as the 19th. That was half an hour ago. They may have got further. I'll check for you in a moment. 50 people in hospital. But if there are 120 flats in that building, I was hearing earlier that 4 bedrooms was commonplace, that they're big flats. So that means they're big families in most cases. Majority of social housing. There's some buy to own, some private owners of previously social housing. And another question I'd like your help with is what happens to them? What happens to the people who've just seen their homes and all of their worldly belongings go up in flames? Well, where do they go? I've got the addresses of the community centres and the church where you can drop stuff off, and it really does focus the mind to see the stuff that they'll need. They'll need food. They'll need clothing, everything. So what happens? Where do they sleep tonight? I don't know. I'll find out for you. But in the meantime, if you've ever been caught up in a situation like this, a similar situation to this, I can't think of one in living memory that is comparable. But give me a call. Where do they sleep tonight? Is there anything the rest of us can do? 10:45 is the time. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need. Where the tragedy in West London this morning continues to focus all of our minds. Dear James, I work at a secondary school in the area. The children are really shaking. Some have best friends in that block and don't know where they are. I tweeted earlier to offer a bed in the area to anyone who might need it. I'd be grateful if you could maybe encourages others to do the same. These people have been left with nothing more than the pyjamas that they're wearing. I'll dig that out, Liz, and certainly sort of stick it on my page as well. It's a genuine question, though, actually. I don't know what happens. It's amazing, isn't it, how many times we've talked in slightly theoretical terms about the wheels coming off. We always talk about it in economics. We always talk about it in terms of our personal finances and expenditure. You know how close you are all the time to chaos. These poor people. And they will be the lucky ones, the ones that have survived with their entire worldly goods obliterated and their home burnt to they will be the lucky ones of the residents in that tower block today. You sort of keep it all at arm's length, which is why it shocks us so much when it intrudes upon, when it comes true, when it comes to reality like this. James is in Sidcup. James, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hello there, James. Well, this brings back memories. I'd first to say how desperately sad this is,
yes.
And to thank our emergency services,
quite right,
who are exceptional people. But the memories it brings back, I've been through 3 of these regeneration schemes, which included cladding these buildings. So I worked alongside mechanical and electrical engineers, etc., and masses of tenant consultation prior to the design being completed and the works commencing.
Yes.
And I have to say, coming from somewhere outside London where there were very few tower blocks, it takes me back to wondering about these questions, how I would want to live in a 25-storey block, and what would happen if this or that arose.
Yes.
But I'm very familiar with the staying put issue.
Okay.
20 years ago, most of these blocks, and most of them weren't 4 beds, they tended to be more 1 and 2 bed, possibly 3. And smoke stopping was put in, so that's the real killer initially, that you wouldn't wake up from. And in many blocks, we then fell on the idea that they should have concierges.
Okay.
Now, a concierge with cameras on every floor, you get alarms kicking off pretty quick. And where they can't fit or money won't allow sprinkler systems.
Which would probably not have made much difference in this case, according to a couple of firefighters that have been in touch. But still, I mean, in other circumstances, sprinklers and fires obviously have a fairly obvious relationship. But again, it's a financial consideration.
It absolutely is, and I would raise questions about that as to, you see cranes up all around London, and I'm pretty clear, I'm more on the new build side now, construction side, but buildings of this height would have sprinkler systems.
If they were being built now?
Yes.
What sort of, this is going to sound like a weird question, James, and obviously we're all reeling from the unfolding events, so forgive me if I misjudge anything, but there's a socio-economic strand to this story already, it would seem to me, because if that flat was in the middle of Knightsbridge with 24 floors, I just can't quite imagine this happening in the way that it's happened.
Well, sadly, I think you're right, and I'm not going to dwell back, but I'll just take you back to Tony Blair being elected, and his first 4 years, he was going to just match the Tory spending plan.
Yes.
And after that, he said he couldn't build any council houses, but he would go through refurbing these properties.
Yes.
And that's when I was involved in regeneration schemes that clad these buildings, but also demolished others because the concrete was in such a poor state, and then built new build properties. Now, the cladding is obviously, the technology around that has developed, but I remember it always being one of the key performance indicators on those buildings because of air draft and fire transfer, etc., etc. So I remember those discussions, but I always remember thinking, I'm very glad someone is on in this building 24/7, keeping an eye on every floor, not only for fire reasons, but public safety.
Of course, and I mean, relatively, again, but I mean, the conversation is going to come around to council spending. Of course it is, inevitably, but it would be one of those things that looks on the balance sheet like unnecessary expenditure. Why do we need a concierge in that block of flats 24 hours a day? That's going to cost us about 60 grand a year, and we could save that 60 grand a year right away, and then we've got 10 blocks on that part of that, 600 grand a year. You can see the logic behind it, but James is quite right to point out that if you had a concierge, as you would in a posher part of town or in a posher block of flats, not even super posh either, but you just would. I'm presuming there isn't one, or there wasn't one there, we would probably have heard, but it's an interesting observation from people in the industry, people in the sector. Speaking of which, Matt's in Faversham. Matt, what made you pick up the phone?
Just wanted to pick up on the stay put policy.
Yes.
But before I do that, I just want to talk about your previous caller saying that all the new builds would now have sprinklers. I'm a fire risk assessor. I'm a fire designer. I'm quite heavily involved in this. And he is wrong. Most new buildings, if they do have sprinklers, they are only designed and put in for a very small percentage of buildings to sort of compensate for a longer escape route or something like that. But the majority of buildings that are going up at the moment don't have sprinklers in. So they are just reliant on this stay put policy, which I believe is totally flawed.
Why? Well, be careful. This is what I mentioned at the beginning of the hour when I mean, firefighters have explained it to me in ways that make sense. You tell me you're a fire risk analyst, but there'd be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people listening to this program, potentially in properties where that is the policy, and the fire brigade endorse it and enforce it. I'm a little uncomfortable you coming on the radio to tell them that they're not safe.
No. I'm not telling them they're not safe. I am telling them. What I am saying is that I think the stay put policy itself needs to be reviewed, and it needs to have its suitability reviewed. The thing with the stay put policy is what it relies on a fire, and as your fighter came on earlier, they said that it relies on a fire being detected at an early stage so they can attend. If it doesn't get detected at an early stage, that's when we run into these sort of problems that we're seeing now. So,
but the fire appliances were on the scene within 6 minutes.
Yes, but we don't know what time it had been.
Yeah, and until we do know, I'm just gonna trust my instincts on this one and hold off on frightening people. Diana is in Fulham. Diana, what would you like to say?
Hi, Jay.
Hello, Diana.
Hi. This really resonates with me because I used to live in California many years ago, and I lost my home in a huge firestorm.
Oh, gosh.
And, thousands of us lost our homes. And what I was wondering, you were asking, what do you do in a situation like this? Well, the first thing I did was call my boss and say I wouldn't be coming to work.
Gosh, yes.
And then I called some friends who offered me and my husband a place to stay. And then we had the American Red Cross. I don't know if you have something like that here.
Yes, we do. I've heard from somebody actually whose house was they were evacuated from their home after a car came through the sitting room wall, and they mentioned the Red Cross. So charities will mobilise and come into their own on times like this. And they give you a bed for the night, do they, or they just sort of give you I imagine it's all a bit of a blur, but they give you the essentials that you need, because a lot of the people in West London today will only have the pyjamas to the night clothes that they're currently wearing.
Well, I was in the same situation. I only got out of there with the clothes I had on and my husband and my pet. Anything that was living, we got out of there.
Yes.
But what the Red Cross did was they gave us vouchers to stay in hotels. And that was fantastic. So we were able to live in a hotel until we could find a new place to live. So hopefully they do something like that here.
Yes, well, we'll find out a little more about that, and I have some of the points of contact for people who are keen to contribute to the I don't know what you'd call it really, the sort of support mission that the country will now undertake. They include the Rugby Portobello Trust at 221 Walmer Road, that's Walmer, St Clement's Church on Sirdar Road, that's number 95 Sirdar Road, Sirdar, and the Tabernacle Christian Centre. God, I used to walk past that every morning. That's Jubilee House, 210 Latimer Road. I'll tell you after the news what's most welcome, but obviously clothes, food, and the barest of essentials would be particularly valuable at this time. The unfolding situation in West London, it's in the sort of, if you're familiar with West London, it's in that sort of the North Kensington area around Ladbroke Grove. Latimer Road is the nearest London Underground station, but you're also moving down sort of towards Holland Park and Shepherd's Bush. It's a big tower block, 24 stories, parts of it still on fire. Hoses still directed at the building, and firefighters already up to very nearly the top of the tower. We know that 50 people have been taken to hospital. We know that there were 120 flats. I don't know for sure how many residents there would be in a building of that size, but I do know that they are all now homeless. And that's something else we're going to turn our attention to this morning. What can be done to help people who are, oddly, the luckiest residents of that building, the ones who have their lives but little else. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. Matthew Palmer has rung in. He's a councillor in Kensington and Chelsea, and I gather you've been dealing with some of the aftermath of this tragedy already this morning, Matthew.
I have indeed. Good morning, James. I've been up since 2 o'clock this morning when I was looked out the window and saw what was happening. But first of all, can I just say how incredibly impressed I am with the residents who live around, who are huddling together and are helping. I see lots of bags of clothes coming into our centres that have been set up, to provide emergency clothing for people who've got absolutely nothing now.
Yes.
And there are those who are comforting and supporting those who are traumatized by the whole thing. And, you know, a lot of people are saying, you know, I've got a spare bedroom and I can let it to a friend of mine who I know lives there. But I think the most important thing to know is that there will be emergency housing for everyone who is affected by this really tragic situation in the Grenfell Tower situation. It will stretch resources, I have no doubt about that. And I think you'll find that there's probably across London, maybe even wider agreement with all the councils that when something like this happens, they help by finding the flats they have available for short-term emergency accommodation until something more long-term can be arranged.
And ordinary members of the public who are keen to contribute anything from accommodation to goods and perishables will be kept abreast of how they can do that. Tell us a little bit about the ward, if you would, Matthew, or rather about the community in that area. I know it well, but a lot of my listeners won't. It's an incredibly diverse part of the capital city, isn't it? It's impossible really to typify it as anything other than absolutely. Multicultural is the only word I can reach for.
It is very multicultural. I mean, you know, the big problem we have, of course, in Kensington is space to find housing for people who need it, and so it's quite densely populated with a very in that particular area a high proportion of social housing with more private and mixed housing. But the residents are very long-term residents in the community. I mean, I think someone said, you know, these are the people who when the carnival comes, they know what they do, and a lot of them work for the carnival, and you know, and it brings in a great community spirit, and it's very, very well demonstrated today, and how people from right up at the edge of the borough up in the north are literally just on the school run or, heading off to work, and they're dropping off bags of clothes that they're donating to people who I'm really sorry to say have got absolutely nothing at the moment, or indeed fear that something worse has happened.
You'll be aware, no doubt, of community organisers, particularly the authors of a blog entitled the Grenfell Action Group, who, I mean, they predicted that this would happen, Councillor, and although it may not prove that events have borne out their prediction, it does rather leave the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea's Council with questions that will need to be addressed.
Well, the questions must be addressed. For instances like this, we must find out what happened and why it happened. And yes, these residence blocks are very important. They represent a strand of thought.
I'm going to read you a line, because you are an elected politician. So I appreciate it possibly isn't what you were expecting when you rang in, but I find it astonishing that this could have been published in November of last year. It is our conviction that a serious fire in a tower block or similar high-density residential property is the most likely reason that those who wield power at the KCTMO will be found out and brought to justice. Now, it may be a coincidence, but it is a pretty remarkable one if it is.
I think, first of all, every residents' association for largely densely populated areas like that, any estates and things like that, you will find these blogs, and yes, they do make all these kind of accusations, as well as informing residents about things that are happening. Safety is very important to the PMO, which is an arm's length, for want of a better phrase, council housing provision service.
Well, what does that mean? Actually, because you could unpick this for us. When you say arm's length,
the board that makes the decisions as to how the money is spent are all elected by the tenants of all the estates that it runs. The entire board is elected, with the exception of a few appointments from outside organisations like the council. and the chairman is elected by the residents, and so they are answerable to the residents, and that way it's much more responsive to the needs of the people who live across the whole of the borough area, who live in those housing. That's what it means. It's much better than having, full-time officers who are just not answerable to anybody, except for maybe someone like myself who might be an elected politician.
It's probably not the time to push further on this series of accusations that have been levelled at them. Obviously, the top priority is to deal with the people affected and continue with the recovery and rescue processes. Matthew Palmer, we may talk again. Thank you so much for getting in touch with us.
Thank you. And keep those donations going in. Thank you.
Of course. And those points where you can drop off goods or make offers of accommodation, I don't know quite how you can do that yet, but you may well be that you don't need to. We'll find out from the relevant authorities, relevant organisations. It's coming up to 13 minutes after 11. 03456060973. What happens when you have your life thrown into turmoil in this way is a question that many people will be finding out for themselves this morning, but I'd just quite like to find out, even though I don't have an urgent need to do so. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. James is in Chelmsford. James, what would you like to say?
It's a bit eerie. 3 years ago to last night, we were woken up by a load of screaming and shouting and looked out the window, and the block of flats across the road from us had gone up in flames.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, literally. It wasn't as tall or as dramatic. It was only like a little 4-story block. But being of a wooden construction, sort of the roof, it was a new build, so the roof took, and within minutes the whole thing was alight. We were just lucky that we were in the block of flats over the road rather than, next door where the roofs are connected or anywhere else.
Yes.
But I feel for the residents and for anyone around there, because just the primal fear that takes over when a fire like that takes hold is paralysing. You don't know what to do.
What did you do?
Little you can do.
Of course.
We got people out of the buildings adjacent to them, as best we could, and woke people up across the street. And then other than that, you just clear the road, because it's quite a narrow residential street. There's cars everywhere. So, we had to get everyone to move their cars so the fire engines could get down. And even then they struggled with water supply. So it took them quite a while to get it out.
One of the grimmest elements that I've encountered just reading around the issues this morning is complaints from residents or warnings from residents that there wasn't enough curb at which fire appliances could pull up after the refurbishment had been completed, that there may be a shortage of actual space for the fire engines to park. What happened to your neighbours? Where did they sleep that night? What kicks in at times like this in terms of organisation and infrastructure? Yeah,
we had the British Red Cross turn up to offer people sort of overnight accommodation and things like that. And then after that, it was weird because the housing association that was looking after the property didn't actually show up until about 3 days later. So they didn't seem to have any sort of say in it until the days afterwards. So they didn't step in at all to offer any emergency accommodation and stuff like that.
Right.
But the Red Cross showed up within that evening. They were there sort of within an hour or so of it all going up, and then I believe the council took over from then and offered them a secret.
And we're left, though, while desperate to avoid any undue politicising, you are left with that observation we've made many times on this programme recently with regard to public services, is you don't decide whether you need a public service by asking if you used it yesterday. You decide whether you need a public service by asking whether you might need it tomorrow. It's 11:15. The Metropolitan Police have just updated us that 6 fatalities have been confirmed following the fire in North Kensington in the early hours of this morning. Firefighters still at the scene. We'll find out momentarily how many floors they've managed to breach so far. I'm going to tell you this because we spend a lot of time together, and it seems that in recent weeks we've been processing tragedy more often than anybody should have to. I've mentioned to you a couple of times that my wife's in the business and files on national important events to international media organisations. The scale of this tragedy, I mentioned right at the outset, evinced by the fact that we were woken up by one of her Australian TV channels. She just texted me while I'm sitting here in the studio and said that was awful. One of the worst things I've ever seen. Vincent McAviney is also a journalist with many miles on the clock, now working working here at LBC. And Vincent, it's not often that journalists report witnessing things they've never seen before. This is been a tragedy on an epic scale, and it's far from over.
Too many sad miles for me on the clock recently, James. I'm down here with journalists far beyond even my years who say they have never seen anything like this. I'm standing about 300 metres back from this building that's been ablaze since I got here. It started at 1 o'clock when I got here at about 3:50. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. Fire out of every window, smoke billowing up into the dawn sky. And we've just had word from the Metropolitan Police that there have been 6 fatalities from this fire. This is an early stage estimate, and they say they expect this figure to rise. They say police were called at 1:16 this morning to the news of this fire. Residents have been evacuated from the block. A number of those have sought medical assistance. We knew that 50 had been taken to around 5 hospitals in London this morning. It's not clear whether those 6 fatalities are from people who have succumbed to their injuries in hospital, or if those are people inside that the firefighters working their way up in that building have discovered. But we're told that that number is likely to rise, sadly.
Do we know what floor they've managed to reach?
We think at the moment that they are on the 18th and 19th floor. This is a 24-floor building. And about an hour ago, the fire had started to really calm down. I moved back to the community centre, but when I came back here about 15 minutes ago, it had really burst out again on about the 16th floor and the 18th floor. There were large fires, so they put the crane up again, and they're still shooting water just in front of me into the middle of the building. The cranes here can only get to about halfway up, so they've been firing water into the bottom floors all morning. Those top floors have just simply had to burn, and those are the ones that are the blackest. The windows completely burst, and all of the cladding that's been falling all morning has really been hindering the emergency services, because it's going directly down into where they're trying to work, but also flying up into the cloud of smoke and then falling down in a scatter pattern around the building.
A lot of the conversation seems to come back to the cladding. It's obviously not something that you're qualified to comment on, but when you describe it as falling from the building, it's sort of melting and burning, is it, Vincent?
That's right. It's melting off. I can see it hanging from the building, and then the panels just detach and they fall down, and those are ablaze as well. So it's really caused a problem for the fire service here. And I've spoken to lots of local residents, and obviously we've seen that blog that's gone out from the community residents group about their concerns on the cladding and on the general safety of the building inside. So Kensington and Chelsea Council had subcontracted the management of this building to another company, and there's a lot of criticism about them not obeying fire regulations, about poor conditions of work inside, unsatisfactory responses to calls to try to come and fix problems or deal with issues. So there'll be a big investigation here now, and people obviously here on the ground at the moment just shocked. That news only just coming through that at least 6 people have died, and undoubtedly that shock over time will start to turn to anger as people here question whether this tragedy could have been averted.
Indeed, and I think we have no choice but to mention and keep highlighting this blog, because its prescience appears to be profound. I'm told that I mean, we know it was updated this morning, so thank goodness somebody involved in publishing this blog is clearly okay, but there's a slight risk, obviously, in sending out an all points bulletin trying to find the authors, that they will be in the building, that they live there. But if you do manage to find anybody involved in the Grenfell Action Group, Vinny, straight to air, I promise you.
I'm definitely trying to find them, and they did. I saw that blog very early this morning, yes. And then from someone got an update, so we know that someone involved with that blog has survived this fire, and they have said, this morning in the update they sent out, they said they're watching this catastrophe, too soon to even guess casualties and That's fatalities, right. And they've been warning about this numerous times. They list the number of blogs they posted on this, and they said all of their warnings fell on deaf ears. We predicted a catastrophe like this. We said it was only a matter of time. You didn't listen to us, and that's now the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea and the Kensington Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation will have serious questions to answer.
Indeed they will. It's a beautiful summation. Thank you, Vinny. And just to add to it, this paragraph from that blog, we have blogged men. I keep saying it, you don't know for sure. okay? You have to recognise that. If this had passed my desk a month ago, I might have filed it under a little bit overexcitable. It seems a little bit unlikely. But we have blogged, they wrote, back in November of 2016, many times on the subject of fire safety at Grenfell Tower, and we believe that these investigations will become part of damning evidence of the poor safety record of the KCTMO should a fire affect any other of their properties and cause the loss of life that we are predicting. A little more on this shortly, but first, Chris Williamson is on the line. He is the MP for Derby North and has sat on the all-party parliamentary group on fire safety. Just quickly, Chris, a bit of housekeeping. Didn't you just get your job back this week?
I did indeed, yeah. I was fortunate to be re-elected last Thursday to represent Derby North. Yeah,
because you lost in 2015, but you got back in last Thursday. Yeah. Okay, so
that's right.
Talk us through when you were sitting on that all-party parliamentary group. You were responding to recommendations, or responsible for recommendations made following that fire in Camberwell in 2009. The Lacanal House fire, which left 6 people dead. What lessons did we learn from that fire?
Well, this is a truly tragic, shocking and appalling event, and it seems that lessons haven't been learnt. One of the things that I was pushing for when I was the Shadow Fire Minister was that we need to look at installing sprinkler systems in high-rise buildings to prevent these sorts of tragedies from taking place. We also need, I think, to learn lessons in relation to some recommendations from the Construction Products Association and organisations like that in regards to the building materials that are used. There are ways and means of actually preventing these sorts of incidents and, fires getting out of hand. A simple sprinkler system would obviously prevent it.
On the inside,
also have an effect too.
Of course, on the inside of sprinkler systems, we were speaking to quite a lot of firefighters today, you'll understand, but their concern is chiefly that this fire appears to have spread on the outside, which wouldn't have been affected by sprinkler systems at all.
No, that's true, and that's why I mentioned the need for better materials, fire retardant materials to be used in buildings. One would have thought this was an obvious fact that ought to be taken, into consideration when any refurbishment work or any new build takes place.
Yes.
And those materials are there. There is absolutely no need for this type of thing to occur. Having said that, of course, had there been a sprinkler system, then clearly, it would have made a major effect and had a major effect in actually preventing the fire from spreading
wherever it started. Yes, you're quite right. Wherever it started, it might have been extinguished. So, the recommendations were put in place, and you're suggesting that they weren't properly acted upon, or the wrong recommendations were put in place? Because we know, of course, that the then Housing Minister Gavin Barwell was told in 2013, or promised in 2013, to have a look at a review that never appears to have taken place. Your input predates that. So you go right back to 2009.
I think it was Brandon Lewis actually who was the minister actually at the time. But anyway, I think that look, there's an issue, is a balance, isn't there, between the cost financially and the cost in human life. I mean, these incidents, thankfully, are very, very rare, but when they do occur, it leads to an absolutely unacceptable and appalling tragedy like the one that we've seen today. And I just think that we need now to take action and actually install these sprinkler systems and look at the materials which are used on all these buildings. There needs to be a review to ensure that if there are any other buildings that has this type of cladding on the outside, that needs to be replaced as a matter of urgency. And money should not be a barrier.
Is it that simple? I mean, I want to keep this, for the time being at least, for reasons I'm sure you'll understand. Let's keep it economical rather than political. This is simply a question, one of those cost-benefit ratios that politicians have to make every single day, where they decide whether it's worth spending money on preventing potential problems in the future, or not spending the money and, well, to be completely cynical, Chris Williamson, crossing your fingers.
Well, that's essentially it. And if you actually look at the cost in human terms, but also if you just look in terms of the cost of rebuilding this building, etc., I think it's in many ways a false economy, whichever way you look at it. Clearly, it's a false economy when you're comparing the pounds, shillings and pence against losing human life. But in my view, it would be far better to have these sprinkler systems installed, because then that actually protects the asset.
Yes.
And you don't actually result in a situation that we've seen today where, I don't know how many flats are located in this building, but it's quite substantial. And so we're talking about a multi-million rebuild program was going to be needed to replace the the apartments that have been lost.
Exactly that. It's 120 flats, and I mean estimates vary, but the biggest I've seen someone suggesting it could cost as much as £6 million to put a sprinkler system in place in a block like that. But I'd file that under profoundly unconfirmed. Chris Williamson, newly reinstalled MP for Derby North, and a former member of the all-party parliamentary group on fire safety. Just to clarify one thing I mentioned to Chris, it was Gavin Barwell who was a housing minister until losing his seat in last week's election. He was among a series of housing ministers who this morning stand accused of sitting on a report that specifically warned high-rise blocks like Grenfell Tower were vulnerable to fire, and that report was issued in 2013. A coroner's investigation into the blaze at Lacanau House in 2009 found panels on the exterior of the block had not provided the required fire resistance, and insufficient fire risk assessments had been made. So the recommendations that followed that coroner's report contained within a full review of building regulations that is yet to take place. Where I'm just going to tell you the stuff that I would like your help with, and you can A, decide whether or not it's an appropriate question. I hope it is, and B, whether or not you can help answer it. Well, I'm just thinking back to the councillor who rang in, Matthew, and I don't think it was the time for a sort of Spanish Inquisition type grilling of a local councillor who rang us of his own accord to talk about the support measures that are being put in place. I will no doubt be returning to similar territory in time with some very important and urgent questions to ask, culled chiefly from this remarkable blog that has effectively predicted what happened overnight. But he did use a phrase when talking about the KCTMO, so that's the Kensington and Chelsea Tenants Management Organisation. He just used one phrase he said it was an arm's length organisation. Now, it is an area of, I think, pretty shameful national ignorance, actually, precisely who is responsible for what in terms of public expenditure and infrastructure. Part of this is quite deliberate, so that things that were being privatised looked as though they hadn't been privatised, because I'm not making any judgment at all about whether privatisation is good or bad on a day like today, but it is controversial. So if you can make it look like something hasn't been privatised, for example, when you see an ambulance, often you don't know that it might be run by a private company rather than directly funded by the NHS. So when he said an arm's length organisation, I, at risk of sounding even more ignorant than usual, would just like your help a little bit to talk me through the money, because I know the chief executive of the Kensington and Chelsea TMO is on about £140,000 a year, and I'm sure he's good for the money. I'm not reading anything into that except to say that, is he actually a public servant in the strictest sense of the word, or are these housing organisations, housing associations, hived off from the local law? Is that what he meant by arm's length? That's what I'm trying to pin down, really. What did he mean when he said arm's length? I probably should have asked him, but I didn't, so I'm asking you instead. What's the setup? I've got a lot of listeners who work in the sector, an awful lot of listeners who have personal involvement in these sort of issues, and I want you to tell me exactly what that means. So they get given a bunch of money by the council and spend it as they see fit. If for example, I think, and don't ask me why I have these sort of figures filed away. I think I read this on the blog that I've been digging into all morning. I think that Kensington and Chelsea has got about £240 million in reserves at the moment, as in its current account. It's kind of spare cash. 10 million quid was the number originally put upon the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower. It came in at about 8.8 million. Where does that 1.2 million go? Does it stay in the coffers of the Tenants Management Organisation? Does it go back into the... Do you see what I mean? We spend all our time getting very excited and very excitable about relatively broad brushstroke politics. We might be talking about immigration or some other great bête noire of our times. The really important stuff is the boring, detailed stuff, and you don't realise how important it is until days like today. So follow the money. What does arm's length mean in the context of a tenants management organisation? Because it looks like part of the council. Kensington and Chelsea TMO manages 10,000 properties on behalf of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. So does it involve profit? I wouldn't have thought so, but I find myself feeling increasingly naive as I look at the world that we inhabit in 2017, and I just want to know. So talk me through the finances. And as ever on a day like today, give me a ring and talk about whatever you want. I'm not indulging in powerful politicising. I'm not having that yet. not today, but I certainly think it's reasonable to draw attention to a few facts, including, of course, the fact that a report warning that high-rise blocks like Grenfell Tower were vulnerable to fire has, well, been sat on is the only phrase that could be employed. It was a coroner's report into that fire that took place in Camberwell in 2009. It recommended a review of building regulations. That was in 2013. And successive ministers, it would be unfair to pinpoint Gavin Barwell exclusively, successive housing ministers have said they are still looking at it. Looking at it, of course, being very different from enacting it. 11:41 is the time. Ade is in Crystal Palace. What made you pick up the phone, Ade?
Hi, good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Right. I heard this awful, terrible news this morning.
Of course.
And the first thing that came to my mind was I used to live in this area because I never knew what tower got burned.
Okay.
But then, until I heard from your program, and by the way, this is my first time ever to do this.
Yes.
I heard from the program that it's Grenfell Towers. I lived at this tower in 1990, 27 years ago. And on January 6th, 1990, is a Saturday, winter morning, my flat, number 55, Grenfell Towers, got burned.
I think you just said it caught fire. It's a terrible phone line, Ade. I don't know if there's anything you can do to improve the clarity of the phone line. I don't know if you're on hands-free or anything like that, or if you could just... I don't know. Let's find it.
Sorry. How is it now? Is it better?
It's possibly worse, but never mind. January the 6th, 1990, you had a fire in your flat in Grenfell Tower. It's a spooky coincidence, but presumably you've called me because you think it's relevant to what's happened today.
Yes, it is, because obviously then nobody died because the fire was, my flat got burned, absolutely the whole flat got burned. But I had to run through the fire and down the stairs.
Gosh.
And I just kept shouting and, telling everybody there's fire, there's fire, there's fire. And the only thing I heard as a report was it was an electrical fault. Because 2 days prior to the fire, the central heating stopped working. I called the council and told them, look, I've got a problem. My central heating is not working and it's winter. And they said they would send somebody around on Monday. But of course, on the Saturday prior to the Monday, the fire, the flat got burned. And there's only one way out of that building. This was 27 years ago.
Yes.
I've not been back there since then.
Well, oddly, reading this Grenfell Action Group blog, which I keep qualifying by saying I don't know that it's infallible, but they suggest that since then the situation had deteriorated because during the current refurb, one fire escape on the ground floor had been sealed deliberately, not kind of suspiciously, as part of the refurbishment process. Presumably, you never went back.
No, I did not go back at all. So I've not been there in 27 years. What happened was I had to leave. Everything I had got burned. So a few families that were around, put me off for a few months.
Yes.
And eventually the council then rehoused me to somewhere else again. So I've never been back there in 27 years. But the towers, the way they were designed even 27 years ago, there was only one way in and one way out. And
four flights of stairs, apparently relatively narrow, that the firefighters would have to. Ade, I apologise. I wouldn't mind talking to you for a little longer, but the quality of the line is so poor. I don't know why. It's 2017. I always love it when Nick always says we get a man on the moon, but we can't get a clear line between here and Crystal Palace. But that's his line, not mine, so I won't claim the credit for it. Ade, I'm glad that your story ended happily, but it must be a fairly spooky morning for you to wake up and learn that a tower block in which your flat caught fire 27 years ago, thankfully not affecting any neighbouring properties, has today been utterly gutted by fire. Fire that should not have spread. Just conscious of veering quite far away from where we began the programme this morning. If you're just tuning in, there's a degree of detective work involved in attempting to find facts on a morning like this, but these are facts. These are not speculations. This is the last available advice to residents of Grenfell Tower, published in a regeneration newsletter in July 2014, but according to this blog, the Grenfell Action Group, not updated since. No reason why it should have been, because the stay put policy was in place before the refurbishment and it remained there afterwards. Our long-standing stay put policy stays in force until you are told otherwise. This means that unless there is a fire in your flat or in the hallway outside your flat, you should stay inside your flat. This is because Grenfell was designed according to rigorous fire safety standards. Also, the new front doors for each flat can withstand a fire for up to 30 minutes. I would remind you, the first reports of this fire came in at 1:15 this morning, and it's not fully extinguished yet. So that 30-minute ability to withstand a fire is, well, moot. It gives plenty of time, apparently, for the fire brigade to arrive. And what appears to be the case is that, yes, it was designed according to rigorous fire safety standards, and those fire safety standards would prevent any spread from flat to flat on the inside. But expertise has informed us, experts, firefighters, other associated professionals have informed us this morning that looking at the pictures, it would appear to be a reasonable conclusion to arrive at, that the fire is spread on the outside. And if it goes up the outside of the building, then obviously windows are open at this time of year, particularly warm, still night in London last night. That hasn't, it would appear, been taken into account by the official advice, although it was warned against very specifically by this residents' association. 11:46 is the time. Just getting an update now from Ian Redhead at St Mary's Hospital on this tragedy still unfolding in London.
Centres or their general practice. We're trying to see as many patients with scheduled appointments as possible during this time. Thank you very much.
So a very brief statement there.
My apologies, just slightly mistimed that with the crossover. It's 11:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Theo Usherwood, our political editor, is here. We finally have a statement from the Kensington and Chelsea Tenants Management Organisation. Have I got this right? They're the landlord of Grenfell Tower. Effectively, they manage it on behalf of Kensington and Chelsea Council.
Exactly, James. So this transition was back in the mid-1990s, where Kensington and Chelsea Council, Borough Council, owned the properties themselves, and then they transferred that ownership over to a not-for-profit ALMO, Arm's Length Management Organisation.
That's an official description then, is it? ALMO,
ALMO,
like Quango,
yes.
Arm's Length Management Organisation, not-for-profit.
Not-for-profit.
So there's some well-paid members of staff there at the top. One imagines that at the bottom they're rather less well-paid. But at the end of the year, there's no money left to divvy up, as it were.
Exactly.
Okay.
So they take...
well, that's good to know.
They collect the rents. They make sure that the buildings are properly maintained, and they had a contract for £2.6 million with an organisation called Harley Facades to replace the cladding on the side of Grenfell Tower. I've actually just been in touch with Harley Facades, and they tell me that they can't make a comment, and the gentleman I spoke to said he was in a very, very difficult position.
The scope of works, according to the release that they issued after securing that £2.6 million contract, was overcladding with ACM cassette rain screen, window replacement, curtain walling, louvres and feature metal work. One can imagine why he will be perhaps not in the mood to talk to you at the moment.
Very much so. Robert Black, the Chief Executive of the Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation, as you say, has released a statement. It has taken quite a lot of time and persistent phone calls from myself and I'm sure many other journalists to get it. The fire at Grenfell Tower is devastating. The reports of injury and losses of life absolutely heartbreaking. Along with my colleagues, I have been supporting residents since the early hours, working with the emergency services and the community. Respite centres at Latimer Community Centre, St Clement's Church, Harrow Club and Rugby Portobello Trust. The Casualty Bureau number, I know you've read it many times, we can't read it enough.
No,
0800 061 2330 0800 06 0961233. Currently, we're focusing on helping those residents and the London Fire Brigade in investigating the safety of the tower's structure, but we will issue a further statement in due course. We also now know that the talks between the government and, the Tories and the DUP, to form a government, I should say, are going to be delayed further. They'd hope to reach a deal either today or tomorrow. It's now looking like next week.
Indeed. So we're still I noticed yesterday Michel Barnier tweeting that they're getting impatient for us to form a negotiating team. And of course, we still haven't officially formed a government.
No, we haven't formed a government yet. It's going to take a bit more time. From one of the hold-ups is finding enough money in the Treasury, because of course the DUP have a shopping list. So that's the hold-up at the moment. Obviously, what's happened now will take up some of the Prime Minister's time. So we are expecting a statement from Nick Hurd, who is the new Fire Minister. Interestingly, James, and it is a point of note that Alok Sharma, the new Housing Minister, won't be making a statement from what we understand.
Theo Ashford, many thanks. We may see you again before 1 o'clock. I'm sure you'll be back on air this afternoon if we don't. 11:53 is the time. So these arm's length organisations are interesting. It would appear that they're owned by Kensington and Chelsea, so the public, any surplus would be retained within the public sector. I just want to get a little bit more clarity on that. Lee in Durham thinks he can help. Lee, what would you like to say?
James, I just thought I'd help you out. The Arms Length Management Organisation, or ALMO,
yes,
as it's usually referred to, is in fact the council. It is 100% owned by the council. It was set up many years ago under Labour government.
Yes.
To basically give the council the ability to do more freely, as a private company could with the housing stock, and also they could then set up as a charitable status to be able to claim various what was called ERDF, which is a European Regional Development Fund.
Okay.
They could claim various different things. The other
because Margaret Thatcher's government passed legislation that made it illegal for councils to indulge in property speculation, to profit from property.
Yes.
So
yes.
There
was a spin-off from that. Yeah. So that was the element of it. The other thing, when people say that they've got they live in social housing,
yes,
the other type of social housing is what's called RSL, which is responsible social landlord, and those are ones where a housing stock has been sold to a private entity. So there was a number throughout the country of maybe 3,000, 4,000 properties. I won't name any names, but I suppose I can if you want. But they are owned by a private company. Now they still have to operate in exactly the same way under the same code of conduct in terms of looking after tenants and things. But they are privately owned, and most of them are the likes of big banks own them and things like that.
Okay,
they're the two. But Almo. If that's, I don't know. The events in London are quite tragic, and I send my regards. But
of course,
I don't know if they are an ALMO, an arm's length management organisation. They are in fact the council.
Except in terms of accountability. I need to dig in further. It's my job, not yours, to get a clearer bead on this and the relationship between that. Council property speculation being banned effectively in the early 1980s, and this looks to me like a way to wriggle around that original legislation. But I could have got that wrong. But they said that you'd be less accountable, wouldn't you, as you're the chief executive or the top man at an ALMO?
No, if you look at the board of an ALMO,
yes,
it's made up of the council members. So it is exactly the same. They're accountable. They're 100% subsidiary. The processes are exactly the same. Board meetings are sat on by the councillors of the council, so they are. There is representatives elected by
residents from the residents' pool. So there's no way. I suppose what I'm just seeking to establish is that if there do turn out to be difficult questions that need to be answered, they need to be answered by the council and the council chief. They can't just be palmed off on the tenants management organisation.
No, arm's length was a term set up so they could claim various different funding streams and various different charitable status for VAT and tax implications. If you look at arm's length management organisations, you will find the same people sitting on that board as they sit in senior roles on the council.
Got you, Lee. How do you know all this? What are your qualifications?
I do. I thought that was on a Thursday.
Well spotted.
I'll have the round of applause anyway, though.
I don't think so.
No, I do a lot of work for both, and I do a lot of work for Almos and RSLs, and they are in fact exactly. They have to abide by the same code of conduct as probably the overarching understanding, albeit one is private and one is owned by the council.
Got you. Thank you very much indeed, Lee. It's 11:57. Just again returning to this action group, the suggestion that the TMO or the council might not have known what they were up to. Someone's just forwarded me a letter with the relevant address redacted. It appears to be to a gentleman called Francis O'Connor who ran the Grenfell Action Group, and it calls upon him to take down elements of his blog that make unfounded accusations against named individuals. So it's clear evidence from the senior solicitor in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. I'm making no comment at all on those accusations. If indeed they were unfounded, then of course the council's lawyers were quite right to get involved, but it shows that the council knew what was appearing on that blog. So there's no room there to claim ignorance or deny knowledge of these incredibly detailed accusations and allegations that, you wouldn't believe me, would you, if I didn't have it in front of me? If I said there's a blog out there that effectively said there is a disaster waiting to happen in West London, but I don't think anyone's going to believe me until it does happen. And that is, it would appear, the situation in which we find ourselves this morning. The time now is approaching 12 noon. I had quite a emotional call from a mate the other night who was having a bit of a Barney at home, and he used a phrase I'll never forget. He said, "It's like I'm screaming and nothing's coming out." I can't help wondering whether the people who wrote this blog, who wrote this incredibly detailed succession of articles about what they felt was problems, disasters waiting to happen in their own community, I can't help thinking that today that's exactly how they must have felt over the last few years. If they have got this right and their descriptions of problems in the building do turn out to have contributed to what's happened overnight, that notion of, yeah, we all have it, don't we, of screaming at the top of your voice but no noise is coming out, you can't make yourself heard somehow, becomes quite chilling. It's coming up to 12 noon. I'm still taking your calls. I'm still trying to find out more about what has gone on, and I'm still trying to resist the urge to politicise this tragedy, given especially that the casualty count is still unconfirmed and very, very likely to climb. I'll remind you of where you can take goods, clothing, toys. Just think about what you'd want. That would be my advice. And I'll remind you of some of the collection points in West London in just a moment. A lot of you are asking about fundraising. I can't do much on the radio because I can't double check everything's kosher, and tragically after the London Bridge attacks, Borough Market of course reopening today, although attention is not going to be focused on that for obvious reasons. People set up Just Giving pages and fundraising accounts that were fake, that were fraudulent. They were trying to raise money for themselves. They were trying to steal from well-meaning people. So I'm being overcautious, but that's better, I think, than being undercautious. These are definitely points at which you can drop stuff off, and until I hear otherwise, I'll keep giving you the advice that just think what you'd need if you'd had to walk out of your house in your pajamas last night, or just in the clothes that you stood up in. What would you want? If the kids are of a certain age, what would you want? I'd have thought a potty is going to be useful, isn't it? Or a high chair. You're going to want toys, you're going to want clothes. Food is probably slightly easier to get hold of than some of the other nuts and bolts of daily living. But until someone tells me otherwise, that's very much my steer. But I'm just one bloke reeling from this horror as much as anybody else is. So you could go to the Rugby Portobello Trust, which is on Walmer Road, Walmer, 221 Walmer Road. St Clement's Church, which is at 95 Sidar Road, SIDAR, 95 Sidar Road, St Clement's Church. The Tabernacle Christian Centre on Latimer Road, 210 Latimer Road, just under the flyover opposite the sports centre. All of those places have collections that have been properly organised, and if you want to contribute, then do so. It's 6 minutes after 12. Omar is in Chelsea. Omar, what can you tell us?
Hi. So I was on my way to my friend's restaurant, and I was on the A40 on a dual carriageway.
Yes.
And then I realized something very strange. I thought it was, some new lights installed into this building. And as I was driving closer to it, I come to realize it was on fire. And that was a full strip. This was at around 12:40. And then I recognized the building to be my friend's, coincidentally, the person that I was going to see.
Yes.
So I FaceTimed him and to confirm if it was his building. And then he said, my auntie's in there right now.
Gosh.
So I rushed to the building. It took me about 15 minutes to come off the A40 and take some side roads. He managed to join me 15 minutes after I arrived. But let me tell you, basically, it was just one strip, literally one strip. By the time I got there, half of the building was on fire.
By one strip, you mean like one story, one floor where you could see flames, and
no, a strip going down. So it was like a
vertical rather than horizontal.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Now, as soon as my friend joined me, he confirmed that his auntie was safe and she managed to escape the fire. She was on the 3rd floor.
Gosh.
And then we saw another man. He was crying and he was glad that he escaped as well, and he was glad that his kids were safe. And he was on the 4th floor, but he was crying and he was saying that if I didn't get a knock from my next door neighbor, which caused the explosion, the fire. He wouldn't have heard, because he didn't hear any fire alarms.
So the person in whose flat the fire started alerted this chap that you bumped into shortly after the evacuation?
Yes. So I asked him how it started, and he told me that his neighbor left the gas on and it collided with the fridge, the mechanism or the electronics with the fridge.
So the gas heated up the fridge in some way and caused a small explosion?
Exactly. So that person went and knocked on everyone's door on that floor. They managed to go down and they managed to knock on the 3rd floor. Some people came out, some didn't, some were sleeping. And then, he was explaining that, and as he was explaining it, police took him aside to question him and take some statements. And then later on, we saw some kids waving their towels in a burning apartment.
Yeah.
On the 17th floor. They were screaming and begging for help. We could hear them, and then within minutes they disappeared, and the apartment they were in, it just exploded. All the glass shattered, and there was like a little sort of explosion. And if you sort of like take sort of like focus on these on the apartments, you will see blue flames, which would be gas.
I mean, I don't know that either of us are fully qualified to say that, but obviously the gas is in the building. Gas appliances are commonplace in all of these. So once the flames spread inwardly, even if the spread took place on the outside of the building, it only takes some curtains to catch fire for that blaze to then spread inwardly, and the gas pipes would be just under the surface, just under the floor.
Yeah, exactly. And so then the firefighters managed to get a crane, and they managed to get it as high as the 11th floor. They evacuated some people from their windows, and but they couldn't get to any higher. So I wouldn't be surprised if everyone from the 11th to the top, a lot of.
I understand.
I'm sure there's been a lot of fatality, and there was like a lot of body bags coming out, and a woman threw her toddler out of the 8th floor, wrapped in a blanket, and we didn't see where it landed because there was a little building obstructing.
You saw that? You saw that yourself, Omar? Did you?
Yes, we've got it on camera, and I also.
Don't do anything with that footage, mate.
Oh no! I didn't do anything with the footage.
Okay.
But I saw a LBC reporter.
Yes.
on the scene, and a female, and I sent it over to her.
Okay,
So,
you've given it to Rachel, which is going to put me in an awkward professional position after I've just told you that it shouldn't be broadcast. 11 minutes after 12 is the time. Omar, how are you feeling? I mean, you've witnessed something pretty traumatic.
Man, I literally saw big men, like men that are very strong, very, very, very strong men with families, crying on their knees, screaming, my baby, my child's in there, my daughter's in there, my wife's in there, oh my God. And like, women as well are screaming and begging for someone to help. The firefighters, I can promise you, they did as best as possible. They tried their hardest. And they managed to take the staircase, even though it was on fire, and managed to go to the at least 4th or 5th floor. But like I had fantasies, just going in there, but realistically you can't. You can't. It was over 800 degrees in there. Fire was blazing. There was explosions. Plastic was melting, and it was spreading everywhere. And they've tried their best, and it's still on fire as I speak. And I just literally from sort of 12:45 or 12:50 a.m. in the morning, I just literally managed to get out of the area, and it was the scene was just something like I just couldn't believe it was happening. I couldn't believe my eyes. And but I must say the people in the area, the community was so supportive. They've opened churches. You're seeing Muslims go inside churches, being cared for. You've seen I've seen so much things that kind of made me happy and made me kind of sort of forget about the fire and see what the progress, and everyone's caring for each other, and it's fantastic to see, man, a community coming together
in adversity. Omar, thank you. I understand, and I thank you for being so diplomatic and considered in your language and your descriptions as well, despite the fact that you clearly have witnessed genuine and continuing horrors this morning. It's 12:15 now. 03456060973 is the number you need. If you're just tuning in, if you've heard 2 or 3 calls, then you'll know that there's no particular platform this morning. We're responding as a city, as a country, to a tragedy that is far from over. 20 people currently in critical care, 6 confirmed dead. Omar, an eyewitness, describing body bags coming out of the building. Firefighters, of course, fighting their way up the stairs in this tower block. We know they've got as high as the 20th floor, but there are 24 floors in total. And I don't want to... God, Omar really shook us up a bit, didn't he? I'm just looking at your reaction there in the text and the tweets. It's also becoming increasingly close to consensus that the fire spread on the outside of the building, which to my amateurish understanding, my completely amateurish understanding, all of the fire regulations that I've been able to find so far and all of the advice to residents on what to do in a fire was based upon the fact that the insides of the building have been designed in such a way to stop the fire from spreading. The time now is 12:15. Omar's call shaken a lot of us up, myself included. I'm not going to make any claim to being somehow above the emotional fray, however much of a professional requirement it's supposed to be, but describing and filming actually the parent presumably throwing their baby out of that 10th floor window. I can tell you, because I have the best listeners in the world and you've responded in your droves, that the Telegraph and the BBC and the Press Association and others have all reported that the baby was actually caught. Omar couldn't see because there was a building in the way. Rachel Venables, LBC's reporter at the scene this morning, I think can confirm this.
I can, yes. Hopefully a bit of good news for anyone worried about the baby. I spoke to a woman called Samira. She lives just over the road from the block of flats which went up last night. She ran outside with her own children and she said she looked up to see people leaning out of the windows, begging and screaming for help. She saw that same woman leaning out with her child. I'll let her tell the rest of the story.
I saw a baby. A mother, I'm assuming, was at the window. She was gesturing with body language for somebody to catch her baby. She was about to throw the baby, which she did. She wrapped the baby in some sort of covering or blanket, and she threw the baby. This was from about the 9th or 10th floor, and a gentleman who was standing beside me ran forward and grabbed the baby, and then her shadow disappeared back indoors. But you look to the left, you look to the right, you looked above her, all around. To be honest, you could not believe my eyes. Well, I was questioning whether what I was seeing was really, realistic, because it was unbelievable. People were literally engulfed in a fireball. It was that quick. Flames, and then part of the buildings were just falling off and melting off and flying into the new secondary school, Aldridge Academy.
So this woman, she dropped her baby from the ninth floor. The baby was all right. You didn't see anything from her again?
No, the baby obviously moved because the baby didn't hit any sort of hard impact. He landed in the gentleman's arm, so I'm assuming the baby survived. And then, like I said, I didn't see the woman. Like I said, I was just looking around. I could not believe what I was seeing, and they were begging for our help, and we were screaming out that we've contacted the emergency services. Somebody's going to be here with you. You could hear the sirens, but it was like we were saying one thing and it wasn't really happening. They were besides themselves.
And do you know anyone? Have you spoken to anyone who's in there? Have you got friends who live there?
But through a friend I've spoken to. Apparently herself and 2 teenage kids and a younger child was given the advice from the fire service to stay indoors, and she did follow that advice, and unfortunately she seems like she's lost her life in that. Nobody can contact her. During the incident, apparently one son did manage to run out or escape, and unfortunately he was engulfed by the fumes and passed away in hospital in the early hours of the morning.
And sadly, those are the sorts of stories, they're the sort of people we're going to start hearing about, James. Of course, the people who survived, hopefully, like that little child, and then the much more awful news, the child's mum, possibly Samira's friend, and certainly Samira's friend's son, who she knows died this morning.
Rachel Venables live at Grenfell Tower, where we know that 6 people, at the very least, have died after a devastating fire gutted the building in the early hours of this morning. Caroline, can you give Omar a ring back and make sure he knows that the baby was caught, because I think the lad was suffering a bit. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. LBC's political editor Theo Usherwood is here.
We now have a statement from the Prime Minister's spokesman. There'll be a meeting of the Civil Contingencies Secretariat at 4 p.m. Today to coordinate the response from the government and ensure the emergency services and local authorities have everything that they need. The spokesman says the Prime Minister is deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life at Grenfell Tower and is being kept constantly updated on the situation. It continues, the PM's thoughts are with all those affected by this terrible incident and the emergency services who are working tirelessly in very difficult circumstances. We're also hearing, and this is, how should I put? Well, I'll say what we're hearing first. From Whitehall sources, that the reason there wasn't review of building regulations following the report by the all-party parliamentary group on fire safety, you heard from Chris Williamson earlier, was that purdah was about to kick in because of the election.
So it was literally on the tip of the governmental tongue, so to speak, and then the election was called, and so the review couldn't be fully undertaken. We have no reason not to believe that. It's worth saying, though, that these recommendations were made were made as a result of the Lakanal house fire in Camberwell in 2009 and came out of the inquest, which actually concluded in 2013. So the coroner's report was in their hands in 2013, and it is now 2017. But that's not to say that it wasn't about to be done before the... The person, of course, who had those recommendations was the housing minister at the time, Gavin Barwell, who is now the new chief of staff to the Prime Minister in number 10 Downing Street. Theo Usherwood, many thanks indeed. More from Theo as and when any more details emerge. Let's go to Kensington, where this tragedy is still unfolding. 24-storey building, parts of it still on fire. I haven't spoken to a firefighter since the first half an hour of the programme. I don't know whether or not you'd want to give me a ring on this one, guys and girls, but what would your colleagues have gone through this morning? What would their shift have involved? What would that particular type of job, which presumably you've all trained for, but not all of you have ever had to undertake? If you want to give me a ring, I think we've established over the years that this is a very safe space for the emergency services, for the public sector in general, this programme. If you want to give me a ring and tell me what your colleagues would have been through today, what you think the job would have involved, I would like to hear, and I'll leave it up to you whether you think it's an appropriate question for me to be asking. I think it is. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. James is in Kensington. James, what would you like to say?
Hi there,
Hello,
James. I used to work as an ex-employee for Kensington and Chelsea TMO, and I think it's important to distinguish the difference between the TMO and the ALMO. So essentially,
so I have a little bit of confusion, and I'm not going to apologise for it because it's life comes at you fast. The councillor I spoke to earlier employed the phrase arm's length organisation. I thought he was employing it in a sort of vernacular way, as in, we use the phrase at arm's length. Subsequent to that, the acronym ALMO appeared in the conversation, so there was a suggestion and a presumption that when the councillor said arm's length organisation, he was actually describing an arm's length management organisation, an ALMO. You're now telling me that's not the case, and this is different.
Well, yeah, I mean, Kensington and Chelsea TMO is an ALMO, but the TMO element of it actually applies to other organisations. So, for example, you do have organisations which are TMOs, and that's residents of a particular block or estate who wish to, they serve a notice on the council stating that they wish to overtake or undertake certain management services of their estate, and that could be for cleaning, collection of rent, maintenance, repairs, etc. They actually have the ability to employ members of staff for managing those services, whereas the ALMO is outsourced to council officials who still run those services. So, you'll have an ALMO which are staff employed by the council,
right?
Whereas the staff that are employed by a TMO are actually recruited by the board members themselves, who are residents.
If you were in charge, is that how you would run things?
Well, generally speaking, I mean, typically TMOs are created as a result of residents seeking or believing that they're in a position to run the organisation.
Yeah, but this TMO manages 10,000 properties. That's not been a grassroots movement from the residents, has it?
Well, this is precisely my point.
Yes.
Kensington and Chelsea TMO, I personally wouldn't say that there is a TMO. It's an arm's length management organisation.
I get it now. God, I really have got the best listeners.
Which still has resident input, but not at the level of a traditional TMO, in a sense, where the actual residents have employed the staff and to run the services that they manage.
Right, so, I mean, I hesitate to use the word murky.
Could be. I mean, arm's length management organisations, you've got them, for example, I'm not sure if I can mention the name.
No, you better not, just in case. Well, you mentioned a borough, that's fine, but sometimes they work and at other times they possibly don't do exactly what they say on the tin.
I mean, generally speaking, there is research to say that when you look at the satisfaction surveys of organisations that are run by a TMO, obviously the residents are more invested in ensuring that those services are run to the best of their ability, and satisfaction surveys actually prove that TMO services are more efficient and residents are more happy with the services that they are.
So they call this a TMO, but you say in fact it's pretty much an ALMO.
It's pretty much an ALMO, that's correct.
Got ya. And so the councillor perhaps unwittingly put us on the scent of this one, and this is where some of the questions will be directed. But just to clarify, it is still, I mean, these are still council properties, and there's no profit left over. There's no profit at the end of the year that gets divvied up among private investors or anything like that.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, the council still acts as the freeholder of these buildings. Yep. So they are responsible ultimately for. They're ultimately responsible. But just to say one other point, James,
of course.
Whilst I was there, I was aware of documentation, blogs, which were widely sort of available and publicised amongst staff working there.
Yes.
Of another estate, not actually Grenfell, but another estate, where again residents were displaying concerns about how the TMO were managing the organisation.
Was it Silchester?
It wasn't, no.
Oh, okay.
Am I allowed to say the name? Or I don't know.
You can, if you can report, you can tell me the name of an estate where residents have expressed fears. Yes.
residents have expressed fears at the World's End Estate
in Chelsea, at the top of the King's Road. Okay. And we'll keep an eye on that as well. James, thank you. Keep in touch, mate, yeah? Mind how you go. 12:30. Stuart Cundry, the Metropolitan Police Commander with responsibility for this operation, is giving a brief press conference, but it started 2 minutes ago, so what I'll do is record it and play it to you from the very beginning in a moment. Before that, we're going to talk to Terry from Eltham, who is on the line. Terry, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, James, I just heard you're asking for firefighters that could have an idea of what went on there.
Yeah.
I was at that fire from 2 a.m. this morning until probably 10 a.m. this morning.
Okay.
So, I mean, to be honest, it was, when we turned up, we couldn't see the side. There was only one side that was on fire. But within a couple of hours, that whole building was completely engulfed. And it was almost like the town inferno and 9/11 rolled into one.
Oh, mate.
The amount of debris, flaming debris, because to get into the building we had to run the gauntlet of the debris, which the police was providing riot shield, so we were running a gauntlet every time we went in the lobby. Me and our crew were involved in rescues on the stairwells, on the way up to certain flats that we were detailed to go to from fire survival guidance.
Yes.
And we were just meeting people coming down the stairs in smoke. Don't know how they was breathing. We were in breathing apparatus, and we were literally carrying them down the stairs. But to the amount of kit that this job has absorbed from the London Fire Brigade, it's unbelievable. It's like a war zone there.
How long have you been in the job, Terry?
27 years.
Have you seen anything even remotely like this before?
Nothing like it, ever. It's unbelievable. A building could go from being a fire in a flat, which we believe was on one of the lower floors, to the whole building, literally 100% of the building on fire. Unbelievable. And what you were saying about earlier, about the fire spreading on the outside.
Yes.
It's called the Coander effect. It's to do with the winds whipping up the flames and going through open windows and stuff like that. Which is, it was a hot night, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
You can imagine all the windows that are open. I mean, I don't know how far our crews got in there, but I only went as far as the 10th floor. And what we see, there definitely will be, that toll is going to rise, what you can see in there.
I understand. I understand what you're saying. We're told they got as high as the 20th. Yeah. They got as high as they have now got about as high as the 20th. If you can,
say that, yeah.
If you can, and by all means,
I can't say too much, James, obviously, but I don't want to get myself in trouble.
No, I understand that completely.
No matter what plan you had to deal with that sort of fire, that plan was gonna fall down. That was unbelievable. Nothing, no plan you had, because there was hose going everywhere. There was one small staircase that everyone was going up. It was just like them images of 9/11. We're going up the staircase and people were coming down in smoke, and it was unbelievable. I've never seen nothing like it in my life.
I can't. I mean, obviously, if you're 27 years in the job and you are describing it as unprecedented and unbelievable, then obviously I
can't see how this is not the biggest fire we've had since the Blitz, not including terrorism. I can't see how this is not going to be the biggest thing that's happened. It's unbelievable, James. Unbelievable.
What do you do now, Terry? How do you, as a firefighter who has seen unspeakable things clearly, and I understand why, and I wouldn't want you to go into any detail about that. What do you do now? Just as a human, as a man.
Fair, we were all told. We all went to one of the closest stations when we left the job to write statements of what we've seen, and then we were all offered counselling and stuff. Yeah. But I didn't take counselling. I'm fine. But. They're dealing with it well. They're trying to nip it in the bud, any problem. So, but I'm at home now. I'm off duty, so until tonight. But I imagine this is going to be going on a few days. I mean, I can't see. It must be sucking up all the resources of the London Fire Brigade without going into the reasons why. All the stuff that went on. I don't want to politicise it, but. No. We had, we've had a massive job on Sunday, which was taking up all the resources. God knows what this is going to do.
So what time are you back on shift, just for people who aren't...
I'm back tonight at 8 o'clock.
So you clocked off at 10 o'clock this morning after dealing with this, and you're back on at 8 o'clock tonight?
We're back on at 8 tonight, yeah. Well, we basically haven't had any sleep, because we had a couple of calls before that, maybe 11 o'clock or something. So we'll be lucky if we've had an hour, but I feel okay at the minute. So.
All right, well, look after yourself.
Just got to crack on.
Yeah, well, you do, but equally...
I just want to give you a bit of an idea, James. It was literally a Tower Inferno and World Trade Centre, but obviously in a smaller scale.
Yes, but in terms of the speed with which it spread, and I think that that image I have of you being showered with debris as you tried to get into the building gives an idea of just how quickly things went.
Yeah, we had to literally run under riot shields. Well, there's loads of police there with the riot shields, and they was basically doing a great job, actually, because without them, we were struggling because it was... we were completely knackered, excuse me, my language. We were completely worn out because the fire gear gets wet and heavy. The breathing apparatus weighs, 18 kilos or so. So, it's, yeah.
Yeah, I hear
to
you.
give you a bit of an idea, I mean...
Terry, you're a star.
I didn't see a lot of the stuff that your callers were saying. I know for a fact that one of our guys got hit by someone who had jumped.
Oh, God.
But he was fine, but I'm not sure whether I should say that, but, I've said it. But, I don't know about the other stuff, the baby someone mentioned.
No, we've heard from multiple sources that the baby was caught by a bystander. So, I mean, these are scant silver linings, aren't they? But again, it illustrates just how, what's the word I'm looking for? This is unlike anything. You just cited the Blitz as a point of reference. This is what's going to emerge in the course of the afternoon.
Historically, I've looked at fires, and I was on the IRA bombings at Canary Wharf. I was on the St Mary Axe bombing, all these sort of things. But to see a whole 24-storey building on fire, it's just, how does it happen?
Well,
how does it happen in a first world country? I mean, we see all this stuff on the news in third world countries sometimes. You suspect their building regulations ain't up to it, but how it happens in London in 2017 is anyone's guess. But, I'm not casting any aspersions.
No, you're not, and it's not your job to find out. It's arguably the job of journalists and politicians. You, sir, are a hero, and you've done your job today.
It will come out in the wash, James, that's for sure.
Bless you, Terry.
Thanks, man. No worries.
Take it easy. 12:42 is the time, and I'm sure that if you were not already, as I am and have been since I started doing this job, a fully paid up member of the Fire Brigade Appreciation Society, then you will be now. Wow. God, what a pathetic way to earn a living it is, sitting here talking into a microphone. What an absolutely pathetic way to earn a living. What that man has just done, you could hear him already processing it in his head, already dealing with, I don't need counselling. You might need counselling. There's no harm if you do, mate. Talk to someone. Talk to me again if you want. Talk to whoever you want. But to do that, to go to work every day knowing that that's a possibility, and then to turn up on a night like last night and to see 27 years in the job. 27 years, and he's never seen anything like it. Questions are only just beginning to be formed, aren't they? Thanks again, Terry. Take it easy. 12:43 is the time. Calvin is in the city. Calvin, what would you like to say?
Hi, afternoon. Just speaking on Terry, I'm ex-firefighter at the London Fire Brigade, so I can talk more about the operational side and what we go through in training.
Good, thank you.
Terry being on the job 27 years, and all fair play to him, glad he's still sticking it out and giving it a good go. The problem you will find with Terry, you would have had in that situation, being under air, he would have been limited to compare to much of the younger guys, which made him his operational time under in the smoke-filled rooms very limited. Normally what we get on the BA side of things is about 30 minutes on a good day. In those type of conditions with the heat, obviously dealing with...
So this is just to translate, the BA, breathing apparatus, this is the amount of time you can function usefully before you have to get back outside and take the kit off and sort of reacclimatise and reload, yes.
Yeah, well, basically what happens, normally operational procedures, we can only enter twice on air. It's due to health and safety regulations, not overexerting, because...
Otherwise there'll be casualties inside. The last thing you can afford to do is faint in the middle of a burning building.
And you probably will find there were some firefighters were under those conditions yesterday, would have been close to fainting or be suffering from exhaustion, because the heat alone is so overbearing with all that gear on. I've had a couple of jobs when I was in the service, nothing compared to what happened this morning.
Sure.
Where the fire was, so intense that you're sweating and you think it's actually the water, but internally it's yourself. You are just drenched. So you're becoming dehydrated. You're trying to, operate this heavy equipment. The footing around you is all loose. You've got hoses you're tripping over. You can't see. You can't hear. Those firefighters last night who dealt with that particular building, last night, I can only imagine what they've been through, because I've never in my time in the service experienced anything close to that. And I can tell you now there's going to be a lot of firefighters who are going to be quite stressed with,
of course,
not just the physical side, but the mental side, what they've experienced. I mean, they've put their lives on the line. They've gone out there doing the job, what they've been trained to do. And the other thing you'll find is that none of these firefighters would ever experience this in training. There's no real training program that the fire service that I recall dealing with this type of incident. I mean, we get trained on what we normally would have.
But that's just a question of plausibility, Calvin. It's not a finger-pointing moment, really, because I thought what came across from what Terry said is that this just isn't supposed to happen in a first-world country.
No, absolutely. Look, we are taught about how the procedures of these type of incidents on the tower blocks, that we'll have a staging post, normally two floors below the source of the fire. And then the firefighters would then have all the equipment brought up there. Now, depending on the age of the building, would the building have wet risers or dry riser, which is, do we pump water up to the 10th floor, the 11th floor, or is the water source available at that level? Now, I'm not too sure about the building in particular, what is happening. I know it was under renovations and there was things being done on it, but that could have played into the fact that the fire may have been a bit of a problem getting water. I don't know.
Well, that has been reported, or at least I've heard that anecdotally, that there was a point above which the water couldn't get. But it will be all these sort of details that emerge as people try to piece together how... I'm reeling a bit, Calvin, from Terry, and your ex-job, and I can tell that you are as well, that idea that someone with nearly 30 years on the clock has spent the night witnessing scenes he has never seen the like of before and can't quite understand how it could have happened in a city like London in an era like this, that's astonishing testimony.
No, right, absolutely. And I fully applaud the guys, a lot of people give the firefighters, they say there's not many fires.
Not on this watch they don't, mate. Not on this watch they don't, and they never will. I promise you that. It's 12:47. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Calvin, thank you. You'll let me read this out. It's from a mate of mine, someone who's only become a mate as a result of doing this job, and I've met him on a couple of occasions. He won't mind me describing him as 6'4" of absolute soppiness. He also happens to be a firefighter. Jakey, thanks, James. We're often forgotten about, he writes. I remember we are London's insurance policy. We always give our best when called upon, referring, of course, to that remarkable call from Terry, who, I don't know what you took away from that, apart from the fact that we're clearly going to have to prepare ourselves for an increase in the casualty count. That idea that he's supposed to be back at work at 8 o'clock tonight. I just want to run something else by you as well, and I'm mentioning this not to necessarily lead you in any direction or lead you to any conclusions, but because I think it's important that we know this stuff and we keep it front and centre when these issues return during less traumatic times. The starting salary for a trainee firefighter in the United Kingdom in 2017 is £22,017. When full competence is achieved, this rises to £29,345. Higher rates apply for overtime. Crew manager salaries range from £31,189 in development to £32,533 when you're competent. 22 grand to be a trainee, Terry. Carl's in Chiswick. Carl, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Look, we're a small car and van hire company in Chiswick, and we've already taken some items over to Grenfell, and we thought, why don't we just be a base where people can bring things and we can just take items over in our vehicles. It's a
lovely idea. Whereabouts in Chiswick are you?
We're in Bolo Lane, number 3 Bolo Lane.
So near the level crossing.
very close. Yeah, before that. Yeah.
So and people will come to you. I mean, it's a little bit out of the ordinary to do this, but you seem like a stand-up guy. Have we met? Have we bumped into each other on the streets of Chiswick yet?
We have actually.
There we go. So I will I will put it on my personal reputation if you're up to no good on this one, because you clearly aren't. Get yourself over to Chiswick Van Hire, 3 Bollow Lane. I thought I recognised your accent, Carl, and you'll be shipping stuff for people who want to help but can't get themselves over to Notting Hill for. Hey, it's quite difficult to do. You're going to use your free vehicles to do that.
Anytime.
Good man, Carl. Thank you. Well, let's just hope this is the only time. Please, God, 12:54 is the time. I want to play you. Do you want to hear from the police officer or that interview that Nick did earlier, which I think is I want to listen to that again. This is Nick speaking earlier to a chap who sort of works as the secretary to that old party. His name is Ronnie King, and I listening to this interview, I began to wonder, listening to it, whether he realised just what powerful testimony he was providing. See what you think.
The all-party parliamentary group suggested that the building regulations, as a result of the speed at which the fire spread at Lakanal House, ought to be reviewed. It's 10 years, nearly 11 years since it was reviewed, and successive ministers since 2013 have actually said we're still looking at it.
Do you know what action... Sorry, Mr. King. Do you know what action, if any, Gavin Barwell took when he was Housing Minister?
He said he was still looking at it, whether or not to undertake a review.
And as recently... Is that as recently as last year he said that?
This year.
So prior to losing his seat, he said this year he's still looking at what would happen.
He's still looking at it, and he was prepared. He was about to meet the all-party group to discuss it further, and that's when the election was called, and we never had the meeting.
How long had Mr. Barwell been Housing Minister? Do you know?
He'd been Housing Minister for about a year or just under a year.
Right.
His predecessor was James Wharton, who was a Housing Minister from 2015, and James Wharton again met the all-party group and said he was looking at reviewing the fire aspects of the building regulations, and he would make a statement. That statement's never been made, and it's continued. So we've been waiting since 2013, actually, since this was requested to be done.
It's Ronnie King, the Honorary Administrative Secretary of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Fire Safety and Rescue. It's some important questions to be answered there, I think, and the time to start asking them is pretty much upon us. Sadiq Khan's just arrived at the scene in North Kensington of this tower block fire. I think he's about to make a statement, so I'll cross live now to North Kensington.
Grenfell Tower, and it is extremely distressing and devastating. Can I begin by saying my thoughts and prayers, as I'm sure the thoughts and prayers of the entire country are with the family and friends of those in the building and affected by this tragic and horrific fire. Also pay tribute to the amazing emergency services from the fire service. We have more than 250 firefighters, many of whom have been here from the beginning, including the Commissioner. There'll be many more working during the course of the day. Many engines and machinery here, and fire service from neighbouring fire services helping us out today. Also, London Ambulance Service, more than 100 paramedics helping out during the course of the night, and more than 100 police officers. And it's worth reminding ourselves that when there are these tragic fires, these emergencies, there are literally emergency services, firefighters running towards the fire, running towards the danger, whilst encouraging others to run away. We do know that a number of people have died, I'm afraid, and the commander has given you the figures that we have. I'm afraid it's likely that the figures are going to go up. We also know that a number of people have been taken to hospitals. Paul Woodrow, who's the Gold Commander for the ambulance service, will be telling you more about that. Can I just say this? If you are somebody who is worried about somebody who may have been affected by the fire, please do ring the Met Casualty Bureau on 0800 0961 233. If you're somebody who lives in the building and has left safely, please let us know you are safe, because obviously what we want to do is make sure that everyone's accounted for. Danny Cotton, the London Fire Commissioner, has been there from the outset. I've been in regular contact with her during the course of the night. I'll let her speak now, and then Paul will be speaking afterwards, and then we'll take a couple of questions, if that's okay. Danny.
So an update from previously, as I made you aware earlier, at 1:06 this morning, the London Fire Brigade received the first of several calls to a fire in this premises. We were on scene in under 6 minutes, and we quickly got additional resources on scene when we recognised the severity of the incident. The fire crews continue to work tirelessly to go into the premises, to extinguish the remaining fire and to search the premises. As you will appreciate, this is a completely unprecedented fire. In my 29 years in the London Fire Brigade, I have never seen a fire of this nature, and I have seen many high-rise fires. This will, of course, be subject to a major investigation, but at this moment in time, we do not wish to speculate further about the cause of the fire or the fire spread. That is something that will be closely looked at in the very near future. We continue at the moment to search the premises, to try and identify any people. As the Mayor has said, we have concerns that there may be more people still inside the premises. It has been a very large and very significant fire. I anticipate the London Fire Brigade will be on scene dealing with this fire for at least the next 24 hours. Thank you.
Order.
Good afternoon. I can now confirm that the London Ambulance Service has treated 64 patients and taken them to 6 hospitals across London, including major trauma centres at King's College and at St Mary's in Paddington. I can also confirm that a further 10 patients have presented themselves to hospitals across London. Our thoughts are clearly with everyone who's been affected or involved in this tragic set of circumstances. We continue to have large members of staff, including paramedics, advanced paramedics and specialist trauma teams from the London Air Ambulance, along with our hazardous area response teams that are specially trained and carry special equipment such as the use of breathing apparatus to support our colleagues from the London Fire Brigade in the ongoing management of this incident. As my colleague, the Commissioner of the London Fire Brigade, said, this is an unprecedented incident and there is an awful lot of resource required to manage its ongoing status. From an ambulance service perspective, I would ask that only call us if you have a genuine emergency. There are other areas of the health service, such as the NHS 111 service, pharmacy or GPs that can give you advice on non-emergency conditions, and I would request you do that while we support our colleagues from the London Fire Brigade and the Metropolitan Police Service in the management of this incident. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a couple of questions.
There are serious questions about...
Paul Woodrow there from the London Ambulance Service, preceded by Danny Cotton of the London Fire Brigade and Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. You have been listening to James O'Brien on LBC, when far too often it seems lately we've spent 3 hours together responding to horrible events. Stay safe. We'll do it all again tomorrow morning from 10 o'clock, and I don't know about you, but I'll be trying my very hardest to remember to be grateful for what I've got this afternoon.